Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this webinar this morning. Well, it's morning in New Zealand, but Ian's coming to us from the UK. So what time is it over there?
It's 10, just after 10 o'clock.
Just after 10 o'clock. Cool. Thank you for making the time to share this information with us. So I'm Emily Liddell. I'm the Membership Engagement Manager from IPWEA. We're a membership organisation that supports public works engineers, and we have around 1,000 members across New Zealand, and we have lots of events that we run like this one and many others. So you can check those out on our website, ipwea.org. You are not here to listen to me this morning. So we've got Ian Cable, and he's the co-leader of Growth and Lead on Education for the UK's Collective for Climate Action. He's had a stint at England's Environment Agency, and we've just had a really interesting chat around some of the work that they've got going on and some of the changes that are happening in the UK. And obviously here in New Zealand, we have all sorts of reforms and carbon ambitions that we are working towards. So it's very timely that we hear sort of some international experience and expertise in this area. So handing over to you, Ian.
Thanks very much, Emily. Just quickly, how much time have I got?
45 minutes, and then, yeah, we can have some time for questions afterwards.
Perfect. That'll be more than enough, I'm sure. Grant. Yeah, well, thanks very much for having me. Yeah, as Emily said, I have and I still work at the Environment Agency in England. Scotland and Wales have their own versions, so we just cover England. Yeah, I work in working with complaints basically for the Chief Executive of the Environment Agency. I've worked in flood risk management, flood resilience, so mapping flooding and looking at building community flood plans for communities trying to recover from flooding. But now I work in dealing with complaints, which is a very different part of the business now, so reputational management. But I've got a master's degree in climate change and risk management. I got about 10 years ago. And so I've always been really interested in this subject and try to keep up to date with it. And I basically made a lot of noise on our local Yammer page, which you guys might have, I'm not sure, over there as well, in your organisations. But and some of the colleagues from the CfCA or the Collective for Climate Action kind of approached me off the back of that. So, just to go into us quickly, the Collective for Climate Action is a volunteer group, and we host this thing called the Cross Government Climate Hub. We are a group of volunteers from around the public sector in the UK. We've been around for about 2.5 years. We are all volunteers. We have some who are external volunteers. We've got some students who help us with some of the work that we do. We started in what's our Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, which is a civil service organisation, but it's got arm's length bodies in it, like the Environment Agency that I'm in. And that causes a few issues or sticky bits for us to deal with in regards to what people can and can't say. So that's something I'll go on to in a little bit. But so we came out of Natural England in the Department for, or DEFRA, in DEFRA, sorry. We've now got about 200 or over 200 government organisations represented in our in the Collective for Climate Action, individuals who've joined us, who want to be in basically a climate-centred volunteer group. And we have councils in our workspace now, or in our community. We've got the NHS. There's different environment groups in the NHS who we've also brought on board as well. We're getting teachers as well now as well. So different public sector bodies, civil service bodies, councils, the NHS, and more. Originally, our objective was kind of building ambition through understanding. There's other volunteer groups around the public sector that do a similar job to what we used to do, or what we just used to do. So basically doing educational events on climate change, like having newsletters, making people aware of things, having a website, and trying to get people to take local actions in their offices that they work in. But there's something that they aren't doing as well, and that we're starting to do, or we have been doing for a while now, which is building a kind of community where we bring all of those communities together, and even people who aren't in communities, you know, anyone in the public sector basically whether they're working on or volunteering in climate change, either at work or at home. We want them on our space, as long as they're a public servant. We want them to come to the community, share their experiences, even talk about their feelings, but share their knowledge and experience with everyone else, and basically share as much resource as we can to kind of hasten the advance to getting to, beyond net zero effectively, and getting us as resilient as possible to the future impacts that we're going to face. We're as open as possible. Some of the other volunteer organisations have a very strong sense of identity, and it's very much about keeping them not themselves to themselves, but doing stuff for their community. But we offer all our stuff out of. We have an open website. We've got a actions you can take or what you can do at climate change page that we think is applicable to people in the public sector as people in the private, and people who are just members of the public as well. We also do, our events are usually made public, so anyone can dial into them. Usually because of the working times, people don't from the public come to them a huge amount, but we think it's important that everyone gets exposure to this kind of stuff, and that as much resources is shared. That's kind of an ethos of what we're doing. So we do have some kind of promotion of what people are doing in communities as well. We've got some people who in the collective who do community work, and they're kind of building channels on our Slack workspace at the moment, and having discussions about what they're doing, sharing information on the work that they're doing in that world as well. And the idea being is that climate change has systemic impacts and puts systemic pressures on us, and so we need to be able to connect people up in any way possible to make sure that we get the solutions to the top of the pile, or the good ones to the top of the pile, as soon as possible. We do engage with some charities as well. Aberdeen Climate Action is one of the charities that we work with, and they work to connect up councils in the UK as well. They started off in the northeast of Scotland, but they've recently put on an event that we collaborated on a few weeks ago. But they share the same value as us, basically, of connection and sharing information. So the Committee for Climate Change in the UK, they did their 2021 progress reports of Parliaments, and one of the key things that they talked about in regards to our progress on climate was basically we've got I think about 600 councils of all kinds in the UK, and about 300 of them have declared a climate emergency. And one of the things that the Committee for Climate Change outlined was that they just don't have the resource and expertise to actually implement the changes that they're going to need to make. And one of the key things they said was that they need more connection, more connectivity. So that was great for us because we'd already been around at that point, trying to build a cross-government climate hub. But basically, that's the key part. That's one of the most successful parts of our community, actually, is the councils working with each other and asking and answering questions from each other. So we've got 141 councils so far represented on our platform, and there's about 240 odd officers from those different councils. They're all learning from each other. They're the smaller councils we find at the moment. They're the ones where they've got 1 or 2 climate officers who may not even have a really strong climate background, but they've been charged with the task of basically decarbonising their council and their communities. And there's a lot of learning going on between them, and we're trying to encourage the larger councils to come on board as well, because city councils such as Bristol City Council and Nottingham City Council, they're incredibly well resourced. They might have 20 or 30 climate officers all working on different parts of decarbonisation and sustainability, and they've got a lot of knowledge to share. So as part of that, I work at the Environment Agency, and through my time, talking about climate change around the agency, I've got quite good connections with our climate and sustainability teams. So we're working actively with them to connect them up with councils, for example, on the work that we've done. We came out with our Emissions 2030 programme of carbon reduction, and we were the first public sector organisation in the UK, certainly, and possibly one of the ones in the world to make that pledge to be net zero by 2030. And there was some resistance within the public sector from different organisations saying that it was too ambitious and it would make them look bad, but somehow we managed to get it through anyway. So we've gone through all of our scope 1 and 2 and 3 emissions, and we've got quite an ambitious plan to do this. There's going to be a lot of offsetting by the time we get to 2030, just because we live in a fossil fuel economy, a fossil fuel world. So there's a lot that we're not going to be able to do ourselves, but by managing our procurement and our assets and our land, that's how we plan to get there. I think it's going to be 45% of it's going to be from offsets at that point. Hopefully it'll be better than that at the time comes though. So again, it's about connecting the departments that have already done this work and have this expertise with different organisations who are still yet to do that or just starting out. And one of the examples we've got is the UK Space Agency. They're on our Slack workspace as well in our community. And we've connected them with Cornwall Council. They're a really ambitious council. They've pioneered, well, not pioneered, but they've really implemented the idea of the circular economy, the donut model for procurement, and from Kate Rayworth's work. And they've talked about that a lot around the country, and they're now helping the UK Space Agency on their decarbonisation programme. And one of the things that we found was from working with Aberdeen Climate Action on their Net Zero Local programme that they did a couple of weeks ago, their event, was just there's an astonishing amount of information out there. There are so many organisations working with incredible amounts of expertise to try and help people at all levels of society, from individuals to communities to organisations, and businesses and companies, all to decarbonise. And really, it's just about trying to get people to the right place. And that's what we wanted the hub to be, for a place where people can come, ask questions, and just by asking a few questions of different people, just find their way to the answers that they want to get. We've tried to work in as much as we can with partners just to make those connections and connecting those different work streams together. We've got the LGA, Local Government Association. They're now directing councils to our workspace as a place for them to share resources. And they used to try and do it on their own, but they found that we're having more success, so they're sending people to us. We've got Climate Emergency UK. This is their old logo, but they're an organisation who's getting all the councils to declare climate emergencies, and they're kind of rating all the climate action plans from the different councils. They're basically pressuring councils in some way, helping them to do it, but also share resources as well, but also basically making poster childs out of the really good councils. So we're working with them as well. We've got some of their volunteers in our space. Civil Service Environment Networks, a civil service internal network that we're collaborating with. We promote Thoughtbox as well. They're really good, an educational group. They're international now, but basically they do really, really amazing work in schools with, it's an entire curriculum to help kids think in a systems thinking way, addressing like how the world works, how we are part of nature, and also helping them to deal with the anxieties of what is likely to come or may not materialise. And they work with the Climate Psychology Alliance, and they are a group of mostly retired clinical psychologists now, but also ones who are still working professionally. But they help people deal with the deepest climate anxiety that people can have, from like the Dark Mountain movements and deep adaptation, people who think that there's going to be like 10 years before everything falls apart. They help people with, all levels of climate anxiety. They work with Thoughtbox. They've helped us as well. They've prepared some of our, or helped train some of our volunteers to facilitate different events, what we do call climate cafes, where people can come and talk about their anxiety on climate in an anonymous fashion online, just writing comments, and then you have a facilitator will talk through the different parts that people have mentioned. You don't have to be anonymous, but that's just one of the things that we offer to people. And the Climate Psychology Alliance, I'm not sure if they're in New Zealand yet, but I know they've grown through Europe quite quickly. But if people have climate anxiety, they offer free counselling to people. So it is an amazing resource for people who are really struggling. There's a huge amount of goodwill out there. Like all of these organisations, they've given us everything that we've got from them for nothing. Geeky Zero is a carbon reduction app, and they've given us like premium access to their online carbon reduction app, where you can bespokely create different programs to help people compete against each other in teams. So that's a really interesting thing that we're just looking into at the moment. And also another one called Carbon Copy, where people just showcase the work they've done. So it's kind of self-reported work, showcasing your case study of the work that you've done. You have contact details of who's done it, how you've done it, and you expect people to contact you on it. And they're doing that for councils, communities, and companies as well. So we're promoting their work, and they promote us as well, trying to bring people to us, to our platform. And also Cadence Roundtable, they're a really interesting one. They've come out of the NHS, and Ben Tong, who's used to be, or he still is, the sustainability lead for their IT, which is obviously a massive undertaking because the NHS is so huge. They've also seen just the amount of pressure that is on, the amount of pressure that's been put on the public, on the NHS over the COVID-19 pandemic, through resources, staffing, PPE, all these kinds of things. And he's managed to get a resilience agenda into the sustainability side of things as well. And Cadence Roundtable is a group that he started independently, and it's international, like anyone can attend those events, but they're starting that conversation about building resilience and just keeping the lights on when we have things like, you know, back-to-back breadbasket failures that will hike food prices and cause huge amounts of impacts in third world countries where we get a lot of our resources from. That kind of thing, like really thinking about what could really go wrong and how to try and prepare ourselves for those kinds of things. So yeah, there's a huge amount of goodwill out there, and it's a pretty inspiring space to be in a lot of the time, if I'm honest, as well as obviously having to deal with the difficult facts that we have to think about. So the Cross-Government Climate Hub, it's the main part of it is a Slack workspace. So we just basically get people to update their profiles and add some detail about themselves, make sure there's a nice picture of them in there, set their notifications. If any of you have used Slack before, it's a really useful platform. It's hard to get people to use it properly because it's a little bit different from everything else. But basically we want to have it, or we have it so far, as a self-selecting climate aware group of public servants where they talk about what they've done. They've listed their profiles of what they know and what they do, where they work. And they've also set up their, you know, the idea is that they will set up their notifications. This is another thing that we're working on. We've got an engagement week coming up in the next couple of months about trying to get people to understand and use the platform better than they already do. And that's when you set your notifications, you can find out about conversations that are going on all across the platform. So if they're anything to do with something you're interested in, then you'll find out about it. And it just connects people from all these disparate groups with each other so that they can share knowledge from seemingly unintuitive areas like Cornwall Council and the UK Space Agency, for example. So we're really labouring the networking side of it. And we've even got a couple of channels, the NHS channel, our National Health Service channel. We've got a working group that's growing to build engagement there. And we've also got one that's already existing in the council's channel. So the working groups help to make sure that questions that are put on there in those channels are answered. And it takes a little bit of heavy lifting to get people to really engage and feel like they're going to get something out of the platform. So we have to do some tweaking in that area as well. So it takes a bit of work to get people onto the platform in the first place, but then get them coming back. We've got a growth team that actively reaches out to different organisations, of which there is a dizzying array of them. We've realised around the public sector, just to try and bring them to the platform and get them to, you know, converse there, share their learning ideas and the work that they do. And what we've done is we've tried to make it so that our group's taking a back seat. We're the Collective for Climate Action, but we realise that other groups like Greener NHS, NHS Ocean, Civil Service Environment Network, Cabinet Office Green Network, all these different networks that are within the public sector, they can keep their own identities, but they come to the platform, have their own channels, have the conversations that they're having already in the same space as other people, and they're using some of the common channels to see what's going on in the climate community throughout the public sector. And we're trying to replicate that kind of innovation hub model that they have at university campuses now, where you build a building, bring small companies there, just by virtue of the fact that they're working in proximity to each other. They run into each other, they share ideas, they find out what they're doing, and you know, you develop work organically on that level. So it's basically a huge number of self-selecting or self-selected group of public servants on the platform. We've got just over 1,000 now, and you know, we're still growing. We've got a long way to go, but Slack's working well to break down those silos. So we have people having conversations from all different backgrounds and organisations. There are some challenges that come with it. One of the, we did initially use something called Knowledge Hub, which is a really great platform, and it has public sector organisations all over the world on it, but basically their messaging is really poor. They have ways where you can save information on there, very much like Google Drive does, and you can have Wikipedia pages on there as well. But the message sharing side of stuff is really poor. So we looked for something else, and that's why we're now using Slack, and a mixture of that and, you know, Google Drive and Trello to aggregate information, share documents. But one of the main problems we've had is platform fatigue, I think. Over lockdown, certainly, like more people have been pushed onto other platforms that they wouldn't really want to have used in the first place. And like Zoom and other messaging platforms, like people are having to use a lot more of WhatsApp for their work. And now everyone's getting MS Teams pushed on them, which is like an amalgamation of all of these different things. So that is an issue that we have, and having rolled out or witnessed and been part of the rollout of IT platforms in the Environment Agency over the years, I've realised that even if people have to use it for their own work, we still get a lot of resistance. So we're trying to push it where it moves and get people on there and encourage the active people, but also we're working on engagement programs to get people to understand the platform, because we genuinely think that Slack is a platform that is already being used actually quite extensively by the public sector in the UK to connect different organisations across government boundaries. So there's one called GovDigital, and they've got 20,000 users now, but they are part of the digital workforce, or digitally focused workforce with IT throughout the civil service and wider government organisations. And they get encouraged to use that platform. So it has a bit more of a better uptake than ours does. It's been going for much longer. But at the same time, we're pretty positive that it's going to be something that MS Teams can't offer, this kind of collaborative environment. And a way of breaking down silos and sharing information and building resilience, we think, is going to be something like Slack. So getting people to understand how to use these platforms, we think, is just a good thing for their CPD as well, continuing professional development. But over lockdown as well, like we had some kind of we had more aggregation in offices where people had like community groups that they're working on things, but also and those groups are now lost largely because those offices have changed and people's attendance in offices is obviously changing loads now. We think that most offices in the UK for the Environment Agency certainly are going to be more kind of meeting hubs. So it will be a very noisy environment is what's predicted, and not a place where you get much of a sense of community as much now. So that we'll have to see how that changing landscape works in future. But people's commitments have changed. If people work from home more, they have a different work-life balance. So that was different to start with, but it's starting to settle down now too. So it's this changing landscape that we're constantly having to adapt to. Also, sometimes people like really massive organisations in civil service just don't have access to certain platforms like Slack. So the Department for Work and Pensions is massive. I think there's something like 15,000 people work for them around the country, but they're not allowed to use Slack on their computers. So that is a barrier for us because it's the main way that we're sharing information. But we still work with them in any way that we can. And also we have to triage who are allowed on the platform. Mostly it's public servants, but we do have some charities on there and some other critical friends, we call them. So Climate Emergency UK is one of those, and one of the charities is Aberdeen Climate Action. Anyone who's working with the public sector to try and help them to, achieve greater ambition on adapting to climate change effectively. Also, time is obviously, it's the biggest challenge. We are under time pressure to address this dizzying plethora of issues that the climate and nature or climate and biodiversity crisis presents with us. So that's hard. Like certainly for me personally, it's difficult because you can feel the clock ticking all the time, and knowing that sharing information and building ambition is it's just essential. But as well, as well as the time pressure that we've got placed on us, we have time pressure from our volunteers as well. So they have different availabilities. Some of them do it in their spare time, which is probably the most productive people, like me doing this now. Some people get it in part of their role. I can do a little bit of this at work. But I'm doing both, I suppose. But some people can't attend meetings for our working groups. So we've got different working groups in the collective doing, comms, education, inclusivity, different things like that. Some people can't attend those meetings because they just never get the time. So we have to think about asynchronous working as well. And also one of the biggest problems we have, and we've lost some really great members in the past, they may come back at some time in the future, but just fatigue, just burnout. Basically, in the climate space, it's really common that people just totally overcommit. I've kind of felt like I'm there at points, but I seem to manage to get away with it somehow. But a lot of our colleagues have fallen away, and it's you really feel them moving on. So we try and labour the idea as heavily as possible that people can step back at any point. They can come and deliver a piece of work and then go, or they never have to feel pressured that they have to keep committing over and over again, like day after day. So trying to be supportive of our members is one of the most important things to do as well. Also branding, we've kind of had to butcher the government logo to make it look a bit government, but not actually government. So that's what we've decided with the crown that we've got. And we haven't gone with the black and white logo that we've got there, or nicked that too, obviously. But also like this different sense of urgency, as I said before, like, you know, some of us feel it more than others. So some people, not dragging their heels, but they feel like, you know, there's more reason to be optimistic, and there's more reason, some people feel there's more reason to be, you know, tearing our hair out and running around like we need to get everything done immediately. But that adds to the conversation. Yeah, support from management is another one. Depending on what organisation you're in throughout the public sector, it's very different. And depending on what team you're in within the organisation you're in, it's also very different. So, there's very different cultures in different parts of government. We've got, you know, the professional situation is very different for civil servants compared to an arm's length body. Like, I'm in an arm's length body, and the feeling in the Environment Agency is very much like we can be much more free thinking and free with our opinions on what's happening in government and what needs to be done. Whereas if you're a civil servant, then we have the Civil Service Code of Conduct, which basically, you may understand this as well in New Zealand, but basically you can't criticise the government openly in any way, shape or form. So that changes what you feel you're allowed to say within the context of climate, where obviously no government is ambitious enough and no one's doing enough. So one of the ways that we're looking at the different demands, depending on the organisations you're in, is a kind of citizens assembly or a civil service assembly. One of our members, who is a civil servant in Cabinet Office, he's looking at this idea of we're already starting to get a lot of civil servants together, and public sector servants as well, to just look at how the civil service can maybe change its ability or change its capacity to be able to address issues like the climate and biodiversity crisis. Because obviously, like in wartime, you know, the government just reorientated itself in such a way that it would just do everything that was possible, or everything that was necessary to get the job done. And at the moment, we have some really engaged people in different parts of the civil service who just don't feel like they can do enough. In our Home Office department, for example, we've got colleagues who, you know, they talk about how in the Home Office there's almost no conversation of climate change at all. So not with regards to decarbonising their offices or their infrastructure, or taking any action on climate either. So that changes the space that they operate in and how they feel about what they can and can't do. So we're going to do the Citizens Assembly or Civil Servants Assembly to try and come out with some outcomes that we can present to central government on that issue, and try and get them to change tack on it, because, you know, this shouldn't be a political issue. You know, the prosperity and survival of your population is a duty of care that you have as a government, and, you know, as citizens, we feel we should be able to help them celebrate the good that they've done, and also drive the ambition that they currently may not have. We have a need to build resilience, basically, is the other part of this. And as I mentioned before, Cadence Roundtable, an organisation that's kind of grown up out of the NHS, having these conversations now. We can see that the ambition is building, but obviously so are the challenges. The longer we wait, you know, the idea of 1.5 degrees now is pretty close to impossible. You know, it's still technically feasible, but we're pretty certain it's not going to happen. You know, even with the overshoot and carbon capture situation that we're projecting in, you know, the IPCC projections. So we've basically got to think about what are we going to be capable of as human beings in addressing this issue. We're going to need a lot of wiggle room, because you know, we've got things mapped out with quite a high level of risk in them. You know, we're still, even when we signed the Paris Agreement, we were talking about there being, you know, a 1 in 3 chance of us not meeting and not staying below 1.5 degrees. Now that looks almost certain that we're not going to. But at the same time, we've got to think about what happens when the next pandemic comes, because there's a good chance we will have another one. You know, we've had several in the last century, or in the last 100 years, so we should expect other ones in future. You know, what happens when the economy of, like, developing countries, for example, or other economies is impacted, that may stifle our ability to, you know, do the work that needs to be done in terms of decarbonisation and even carbon capture. So, you know, we've got to build a lot of wiggle room into what we're doing. And just, I think today it was the chair of the Environment Agency, you know, she came out with this really strong statement saying adapt or die with regards to, you know, building resilience to the flood risks and stuff that we're going to be faced with in the UK, that, you know, Europe has just been on the sharp end of. And so we've got a lot of ambition in arm's length bodies in government, but at the same time, we look at what the Environment Agency is doing, a science-led organisation. And for example, we're protecting London in the next flood scheme that we're building to take over the Thames Barrier, which I don't know if you know about. But it's going to be protecting London to a 4 degrees sea level rise by 2100. So I think like Kevin Anderson, I don't know if you've heard of him, but he's a really good academic who works at the University of Manchester. And he was saying, the best thing to do is hope for 2 degrees and plan for 4, because in the resilience that we're building, in a lot of the work that we're doing, it will be much easier to do this now than it will be obviously in future. If you're already building a dam, or if you're already building flood defences, or if you're already building infrastructure in your cities to keep them cool at different temperatures, then do it all in one go, or get it all moving in one go. And the considerably different impacts to 4 degrees compared to 2 is something that we really need to think about. So we're getting noticed. We're getting invited to more and more events at the moment. I genuinely thought that I'd been invited to something by mistake. There's a cross-government climate ambition forum that I've been invited to in a couple of in December. So that's going to be quite weird, walking around with a bunch of high-level directors and managers and stuff from all parts of the government in the United Kingdom. But it's a great way for us to showcase the work that we're doing and just get more people to join the hub, basically. One of the key parts about this is basically just trying to build that network of resilience. There's going to be, I don't know if you guys have heard of the work of Merlin Sheldrake or in Entangled Life. It's about fungus, or about some of the research that's been done in the world of tree research. I can't remember the name of the chap, but yeah, Peter Wolben. He was talking about in a forest in Germany where he has been working and researching for the last 40 odd years. They found a tree stump that was 400 years old, and as they scratched the surface of the bark, they could see that it was still green. It still had chlorophyll in it. So it had been felled 400 years ago, and it was still working because it was a rich and interconnected ecosystem. And similarly, you look at how capable we are of helping everyone in a highly interconnected and well-resourced society. But we're doing that at the moment with a massive amount of resource. And in future, we're going to have less of that. So we need to work with what we have and connect as many people as possible with as many ideas as possible across as wide a range of organizations and backgrounds as possible. So we've only been doing this for just over a year, but climate change isn't going anywhere. So we're only just getting started. But that is it from me. I think you're on mute, Emily.
Sorry. Yeah, it is an exciting or a scary time from both perspectives. There's so much positive in your presentation about so much, cross-pollination across all these different organizations and things. So it's exciting to see the positive side of it. How can we all get together? Things like COVID vaccine situation where everybody sort of pulled their resources and said, we need this now, let's make it work. Yeah, and pulling a similar thing together for climate change and addressing that is very timely. Are there any questions from anyone else for Ian? And remember, yeah, everybody is muted at the moment, so you'll have to click that little microphone button if you want to jump in and ask a question, or you can pop it on the chat if you'd like as well. I did have a question. So in terms of you did say that you have you control the access to your Slack platform. Do you have international members?
No, not yet. In fact, one of the things I did get messaged from some of the public sector in Switzerland today asking to, just help do the same thing in their country. So like we are getting recognition abroad as well now. And we've had some in Germany too. But one of the things that is actually a worry for us is kind of overreach and just spreading ourselves too thin. So yeah, that's one of the we've got several levels of like membership to the network. People can join as like a kind of supportive member from outside of the public sector. They can join our group on LinkedIn on there, and we've got people from all over the world there. And we do have conversations with people from around the world in that space. But at the moment, one of the things, it does feel a bit like we're running a bit too fast, and it's probably more about trying to pull back as much as anything, and just make sure that we've got the resource to service the number of people or the number of organisations that we're trying to connect. But yeah, as I say, like people seem to think it's a good idea, so they want to know about it in other countries as well. So yeah, we'll be keen to kind of share whatever we've learned with them and help learn how we can do it better as well.
Kia ora, it's Marianne Gadsby-Schoenfeld here. I'm with Christchurch City Council, and just, yeah, it looks like really good stuff. We've had a couple of attempts at this sort of thing over here. So there was and we were using Slack as well at one point, but it takes one champion leaving and the whole thing just stops getting used. That Slack thing, the platforms, what do you use? Can everybody get in there? And it's just another thing on top of everything else you're doing. I just so get what you're talking about with that. The one thing that we have got that seems to be really quite successful and ongoing is a network run by a colleague here actually at Christchurch City, Tony Moore. And it's, I think we're about every 6 weeks, we get together at lunchtime on this sort of a call, Zoom call, and we'll pull in all sorts of different talks on climate change. And it might be changes in legislation, it might be what Auckland Water's been doing, or, you know, and exactly this sort of stuff. And we seem to get 150 or so people online for those, and really good feedback. So just to let you know that's going on, and actually, you know, Tony might be interested to catch up with you at some point. So I'll let him know that I've seen this, but he may well already know of what you're doing. But I think what you're doing is really good, because it's all right if you're in a big council and there's lots of us, but if you are that isolated person up in Kaikoura district or whatever, that I do think that support network is massive for those people. And I hear what you're saying about burnout as well, and I've seen that with a few people too. People are passionate. You've got to look after yourself in there as well. So it is a really tricky balancing act, and I applaud you for what you're doing. It sounds like it's really taking off. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Marianne. Yeah, it is one of those things you do. I'll be honest, I do feel a little bit of burden thinking that if I left at this point, things like, especially in the cross-government climate hub side of things, may not run brilliantly. But I think well, there is enough people on board actually that it could end up being self-sustaining. But yeah, that is something that we found. There's different work streams from when we were doing, you know, primarily focusing not on this, but just on, you know, delivering different bits of work through our different working groups. Yeah, there's been any number of really great ideas. Like we had a climate champions network, and the person moved and left, so that kind of just deflated and disappeared. And what we do try to do, but it's still really hard to do, is to just buddy up everyone with someone else. So every role is done by 2 people. But again, even that is just really challenging. And we're not organised enough yet to look for funding to actually. I've got a conversation with the National Lottery Fund manager this Friday, and just can see what we can do with them. Like, they approached us as well. So it'd be interesting to see what we can do with regards to, you know, what might happen with some more money. But yeah, it is a massively challenging space. It's really hard to get people to keep working on it, to feel like they can keep going with it, because I felt it. You just go on holiday for a week, and I mean, I don't do it anymore because the IPCC report came out last time I was on holiday, so I was tweeting like crazy about that for this. But yeah, it's really, really nice to just not have to think about it for a few days, and that can easily extend into not coming back. So yeah. so the thing we find with councils as well is that it is, as you say, it's quite difficult for very small councils where they've got very few resources, but they're the ones who are really looking to collaborate. So they're kind of the lifeblood of the community that we've got. But yeah, they do rely quite heavily on it. And yeah, it's great to see them using the platform really. And just seeing all that resource being shared. And often they come out with some of the most innovative solutions as well. So yeah, we've just got to get some of the bigger players on there as well to share some of their learning and expertise as well, like we're doing with the Environment Agency at the moment.
Yeah. On that front, you'd mentioned that so in the UK, I don't know what the model is there, but you've got climate change officers. So in our organisation, for example, we've got sort of a roading infrastructure group and water management and different sort of technical expertise. So yeah, in the UK, are those sort of climate change officers looking at the general impact, or would they be technical experts in a particular area?
They have to be massive generalists, and it was really shocking actually, before I'd been exposed to the council space, just the amount of work or knowledge that they have to have, and again, just how thinly spread they are. Yeah, like we've got someone called Heather Foster, who's she's come from the private sector, but she works in a district council, and you know, she's worked on everything from, she's not even the climate officer, she is one of their one of their environment officers. So that's a different role. But she even goes out to like environmental health officer, sorry. So she goes out to like environmental disturbances and stuff, like noisy parties and stuff like that. But she also works on trying to get charging hubs put in at local supermarkets. And she knows about legislation that's happening all across the sustainability sphere. And it's just, yeah, that's what seems so incredible about it, is that the councils, they have this pressure put on them they're really at the coalface of delivering most of this, and they have so little resource, and they don't even all have the same kind of infrastructure for getting decisions made. So my colleague Heather, for example, where she works, she would have to wait 6 to 12 months to get a decision made on getting through a piece of local planning development done. An example was this charging infrastructure for a local supermarket, and yeah, another council that is on the platform, they just have a clear budget, which is theirs, they own as a climate officer, and they managed to get the same thing basically done and approval for it within a space of 2 or 3 weeks. You know, so it was all starting the ball within 2 or 3 weeks. So, you know, different councils have different sizes, different planning structures, and obviously they've got the different political leanings, which makes things completely different as well. So the amount of support is just completely, so that the support infrastructure of it, the well-being side of something is something we really try and help with as well. So we've got channels where people can talk about how they feel on Slack as well. And every week we just have sessions where people can just dial in and just talk about climate or what's going on in their work or what's going on in the world, just for an hour after work. And one of the things there we find is that people always just say this idea of it's nice to just be able to talk to people about this, because in my personal life, I don't get to talk to people about it and freely feel like it's okay to do it. I'll feel like I'm lecturing them or I'm telling them something they don't want to hear. And it is like a lot of people do feel the burden of work, or the burden of like responsibility to do these kinds of things. And yeah, just giving them a community to share those thoughts and feelings in, and also their knowledge and their experiences in, has been something which has worked as well as anything else, if I'm completely honest. People really seem to appreciate that part of it.
Yeah. Well, even sharing those two different structures and how they operated seems like a really valuable thing for other councils to hear about. That, yeah, something like a dedicated budget and yeah, could make a huge difference to the turnaround time on some of the smaller decisions that need to be made. Yeah.
There's something from Mike in the chat as well, talking about, you know, the difficult alarming subject matter and, you know, how do you feel hopeful about the future and stuff. And I think that's one of the things that we have lots of discussions about that. And I think it's different for different people. Me personally, I don't know if you've heard of Dark Mountain or Deep Adaptation, like Jem Bendel's a sustainability professor at Lancaster University, which is known for its sustainability expertise. He basically took a year off and studied as much as he could. And he came up with this idea of deep adaptation, where we just have to basically relinquish our desire to hold on to any of the stuff we have and just come to terms with global economic collapse in the next 10 years. And I went to one of his talks just before Christmas, about 3 years ago, I think. And it was really weird. The CPA, the Climate Psychology Alliance, would have members there, and they were kind of talking people through their feelings and all this kind of stuff. And it felt weirdly supportive in this environment, this auditorium in Bristol, of about, I don't know, 200 people or whatever. And they would start saying, you're safe now, it's okay, nothing's going to fall apart right now. We're talking about the next 10 years, we're not talking about today. So you're okay now, this is a safe space. And I was just feeling like, Jesus Christ, this is really devastating to think about it on these kinds of levels. And I don't think of it like that anymore. I like to think that, and a lot of the members, the core members of the CfCA, like the coordinators, have a similar feeling about it, is that we do have to think about the world being a materially poorer place in future, because it's just unquestionably going to be that way. We can't, we won't be able to extract as much from the environment as we do now, while it becomes a more enfeebled state. So, but at the same time, it's like, what do we really need to be happy? I've got relatives and friends who are trying to give stuff away because they literally have too much stuff. They've got several of the same thing. I mean, I'm a stereo junkie, and I've got several stereos in this room, and they're all ones that have been given to me or I've bought secondhand for like next to nothing. I've got something on my shelf above me. If you can see in the background, I'm pointing my pencil. That's like a little stereo radio thing that I found literally in the tip a few weeks ago. It works perfectly. You can plug a brand new iPhone into it. It's digital radio. It's worth about 100 quid. And it was just left in the tip because someone didn't want it. And so my kind of hope comes from thinking about, as we're a massively wasteful society, that also gives a wasteful system is one that is actually really quite resilient. As we've seen, like in the UK, a very efficient system like our supermarket system is the most efficient in the world, I think. It's actually the most vulnerable as well, because your supply chain issues they bubble to the surface very, very quickly. As soon as lorries can't travel, then shelves empty within seconds. I think we've got about 2 days worth of food in any major city in terms of supermarket shelves in the UK. So an efficient system is underpinned by its inherent vulnerability. And the fact that we're so blindingly inefficient, I think for me, gives me a lot of hope. There's a lot of things that we can just repair that we've got now, or we won't even need to repair. We just need not to throw them away. There's a huge amount of infrastructure that we can repair instead of rebuilding anew. There's a lecturer in the United States called Nate Hagans. He used to be a Wall Street trader, and then he studied sustainable economics, and now he's professor of sustainable economics in the United States. And I listened to him on a very, very good podcast called Radio EcoShock. You get a chance to listen to it, it's very good. All of it's listed on our website. But he was talking about, if you slashed 25% of our economy now, you would take us back to the 1990s. And that's when I grew up, and it was pretty good. I had a reasonably privileged lifestyle living in the UK, but I didn't feel like it was a really awful place to live. And if we take 50% of it off, then we will go back to the 1970s. Now, that is a huge amount of the economy to disappear, but still, people had at least the possibility of living a reasonably happy life in many parts of the world with an economy half the size of the one we have now. And the idea of destroying stuff and rebuilding anew, that idea is changing. I don't know if you guys have it in New Zealand, but we've got repair cafes that pops up all over the UK. There's loads of amazing initiatives about just things that we kind of share information about as well, but like, I can't remember what they're called now, but like community sharing organizations where basically people bring their possessions, like things like, DIY tools and stuff like that, and you just borrow it. And you pay for it with a small amount of money, like £1 or something, and then you use it and bring it back. Because we've all got so many different bits and pieces around our house that we like, tools and things that we just don't really use very much, and we get rid of them not because they're broken, but because we just don't use them. So my hope comes from if you listen to the amount of money that is being diverted now to this, the sustainability agenda, when you see that the amount of wastefulness there is in society, that gives me hope, because there's a huge amount of there's a huge amount that we can save. And also, when you look at the technologies and stuff that are out there, we already innovate even when we don't really have to. Like since the Second World War, and that was obviously a time of great innovation because of war. but we haven't really had that many pressures placed on us as society in the Western world. But at the same time, we created some amazing things, and now there is a common shared goal, and I think that's a really powerful tool. Obviously, we're going to come up with all sorts of ways to shoot ourselves in the face and stifle progress along the way. But at the same time, there's a massive amount of time and energy just from looking at the volunteer space that I reside in. There's a massive amount of energy, mental energy, just going into finding the solutions and getting to the top of the pile. If you want to, we had her come and do a talk for us. Actually, Holly Jean Buck did a really interesting book. She's an academic from the United States, and just writing about some of the solutions that we will need to do carbon capture, to address the ocean acidification problem, and just getting people to use their imaginations and think about a world where we are addressing these problems instead of what it's been for like the previous, 10 years up till about, until what happened about when we've had our kind of renaissance in the last 2 years, where actions really started to grow. People have really started to move and change their opinions and their thoughts and their actions. Before then, it was a really devastating time to be around and to know much about this subject because you saw nothing happening. But now, like, almost everyone's got an opinion on it. Whether they're moaning about Extinction Rebellion, most people are still eating a little less meat, or thinking about, everyone's making these kinds of decisions now, it seems, or lots of people are. So I think there's hope from that. And it feels like we're only just starting and the momentum's growing. Long answer.
Yeah, nice. Oh, well, that's great, Ian. I can sense the enthusiasm and passion you have for this subject, and certainly I think in New Zealand we have plenty of motivation as well to make continued changes and improvements. But yeah, hearing what's happening overseas and some of the best practice that that's happening in the UK. Oh, you seem to have frozen up.
I can still hear you.
Yeah. Oh, you're back. Is really inspiring. So hopefully our listeners today can take some of that away, and we can do as much as we can from our little island down here in this part of the world. There'll be other members who will want to jump on and listen to your wide words as well. And thank you so much for your time and all the information today. So thank you, and formally thank you from IPWEA-NZ.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me. Thank you. It's great work that you're doing, getting people to talk about this kind of stuff. It's so important. So Karen, have a lovely rest of your day. I'm going to go to bed.
Yeah, thanks. All right. Bye.